this session is going to cover quite a large number of activities or areas. So firstly, we're going to hear from Oxentia, who've been working on the review of the Concordats. So that's the review of all the Concordats, and I'm sure Hamish and colleagues will tell you exactly how many there are, because there are a lot more than I realised. So we're going to start with that. We're then going to hear from NCUB, who are going to tell us a little bit about the feedback from the KEC and what the impact of the KEC has been from everybody's action plans and everything that they've been doing on that. We'll also touch a little bit, I think Freeba's going to touch a little bit on the KE review and how that impacts the KEC. And then the majority of this session will be from Greg Wade, talking again about the impact of the KEC and the impact it's had on all our institutions, and that's where we can share some best practice. But also, we want to find out from you some kind of thoughts on what the proposals are looking like for the future of the KEC and how we might go forward with the KEC in its future iterations. So there's going to be plenty of opportunity to feedback. We will be getting some post-its, I think, and some big white sheets of paper so we can record some ideas and things. But this is very much the session for hearing about what's gone before, hearing about what might be planned for the future, and you having the opportunity to impact that, but also to share what has worked in your institutions and kind of what has been the value of the KE Concordat for your institutions. Because I think certainly from myself speaking to others and in my own university at York, we found it really useful for highlighting the value and relevance of knowledge exchange within the institution and getting senior managers to take it more seriously. But I'm sure across the group of people that we've got here, there will be many, many benefits. And I know it's really important for Research England, for the government, for all these senior and key decision makers in the UK to understand why these things are of value to the sector and what change it's making for us. So I'm going to hand over to Oxentia to talk about the review of the Concordats. So over to you.
Thank you, Amanda. So my name is Sarah Allison. I'm a senior consultant here at Oxentia, and I'm joined with my colleague, who I feel like everyone at this conference knows, who is Hamish McAlpine, who's sitting in the audience. And at some stage during this presentation, he is going to join me, and I will depart from the stage. So we're doing a double act today. So we're going to be talking about the review that we carried out, looking at all of the initiatives and the Concordats. I thought it would be important to introduce our project team because we brought in some experts. So as you can see there's our Oxentia team. We have myself, Hamish, and my colleague Britta, who I'm sure many of you have met as well because she's here at Praxis and she's run some sessions as well. Also, we had Paul Manners. So he's actually director of the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement, so the NCCPE. And so he's a real expert in public engagement. And we also had on our team Anne Boddington, and she's she's Emeritus Professor in Design Innovation, and she was our strategic advisor, having held some sort of really senior sort of PVC level roles and leadership roles within universities around the UK. So that was our core team. Off we went. And the point of the review, if we take a step back, so there's a few introductory slides just to look at the context leading up to the review. The culture and environment of the UK research, really needs improvement, and it's not just one or two people saying that. There's loads of people, and so this slide just illustrates some examples. We've got ARMA, the Association of Research Managers and Administrators. Their survey report points to these cultural changes which are required. And then we have Welcome. And they actually carried out a survey. It was a survey of thousands of researchers asking to find out what researchers think about the culture they work in. And that survey found, lots of kind of worrying trends around bullying, harassment, all these really not conducive to a positive work environment at all. And then, of course, there's been government There's the R&D people and culture strategy, and that, it says people at the heart of R&D. It recognises it's really important to have a positive work environment to be able to carry out good research and innovation. And then there's the independent review of research bureaucracy, which also corroborates findings of numerous other studies, but that there's a lot of bureaucracy which universities, which creates a lot of burden for universities, let's say. So that's really important. And then it's not just, the message is not just coming from the academic researchers, it's also coming from those who support research, as I've shown with ARMA, but also the technicians as well. So that's the research culture technicians lens. This is a little bit of, this slide really is just to illustrate, the purpose of the Concordats and initiatives is really good. They're set up, they've grown organically, as you can see over this timeline, and they're set up to address a real need and a challenge in research culture or environment to really try and improve work environment. And it's really important. So we've got Venus 1 Charter, or gender equality, in 2005, career development of researchers a few years later. And then finally, obviously this session today is focusing on the KE Concordat, so in 2020, that was formed. And obviously the organisation that manages that Concordat has been around for a long time, but the actual Concordat itself was only set up recently. So they've really grown organically in response to a need. And there's a lot of momentum, as we can see. There's a lot of need, but also momentum and drive and appetite to improve research culture and environment in the UK, in UK universities and institutions. But I've put all the logos here at the bottom just to show you that there's lots of Concordats, 12 Concordats and initiatives. And they all have diverse approaches to engagement. And, they're all really, really different in terms of their maturity, in terms of the impact, in terms of the scope, so what they're focused on and how broad that is, whether it's national or international, and the ways they monitor and the administrative requirement placed on universities as well, so their reporting and their cycles, these types of things. So really different. And actually what's very interesting is no one really had previously looked at what is the collective impact of all these Concordats and initiatives on research culture and environment, or on universities. What is the impact of them on these universities? So that leads us on to this project that we were involved in. So the first phase of that project. So actually, firstly, I should just say we were commissioned as part of phase 2, but phase 1 had already taken place, and we were commissioned by Universities UK, UKRI, and Wellcome. So they were working in partnership. But in phase 1, they were looking at the effects or the impact of the initiatives collectively on research culture and environment. And what was really interesting, one of the key findings was actually among the excess burden and the need for streamlining, was that actually the way that universities or institutions implement and use the Concordats initiatives is really key to how much impact they have. That's quite interesting. So we were involved in phase 2, and the purpose was to explore potential alignments to try to reduce the burden of, sort of collective burden of all the initiatives and Concordats, and to really try to strengthen the link between research culture and environment to address the problems that I was mentioning on the previous slide. And so the project really involved, in essence, like bringing together initiative owners, and we've got the users, so that's a wide group of stakeholders from around universities to be representative of the diversity of universities that we have in the UK. We used a design-led approach to our methodology, and this involves that double diamond that you see on the slide. So it's sort of a divergent followed by a convergent methodology to come to an outcome and a solution with an action plan. So this project was really to come to a solution to the problem of burden and bureaucracy for universities, and also an action plan to actually make that happen, steps of how to make that happen. And it needed to be co-created as well. So first of all, we did some background research, and we interviewed the initiative owners, which was a really interesting process, and we were asking, we just wanted to understand how they felt about what was being proposed, their concerns, what the opportunities they saw, and the solutions that they could put forward. And so we received a whole wealth of ideas and perspectives through those interviews. And then we collated all that information, we analysed it, and we brought together a user group, which, as I said previously, so that would be university stakeholders from different levels within the university, different roles, but all those who would be interacting with Concordats or using them to effect positive change in work practices and research culture and environment. So we showed them a draft solution. They then were allowed to feedback. During that workshop, it was very interactive. We took that feedback on board, and then we sort of modified the solution, and then we held a second workshop, so that's number 3 on this slide, with the initiative owners themselves. And that was to iterate the proposed solution. So we showed it to them. We said, look, this is based on both your feedback and the users' feedback. And then we gathered more feedback on that. They helped us to really enhance the solution. And then finally, we had a third workshop where we brought both the user group and the initiative owners together. And that was really to refine the solution and to create an action plan for going forward with that. So just to recap on the sort of problem that this review was trying to solve. You know, there's lots of well-documented issues in research culture and environment. And the Concordats and initiatives, they have this real drive. They're designed and they have a real drive to help. But currently, there's lots of them, and some have quite a weak link to research culture, or it's difficult to see in some cases. And they have a low visibility in terms of researchers and other stakeholders, and they don't really understand how the Concordats initiatives may be able to help them. And having all of these different initiatives and Concordats makes it difficult for senior stakeholders to be able to manage and track and engage with them. Obviously, if the Concordats initiatives are not working closely together, which was something that we found during the study, there is a potential for data duplication and inefficiency. And of course, there's multiple reporting points and forms spread across all of these initiatives. Also, we found that, there may be a lack of considered connection to other instruments, which I think Hamish will be elaborating on in the next few slides, and no clear pathway or guidance for these, new concordats that are being formed to address emerging needs. So I would like to invite my colleague onto the stage to talk through the solution that we came to. Thank you, Hamish.
Thanks very much, Sarah. So, as Sarah said, the dual aims of this were really around both potential burden reduction, but also strengthening that link to the research culture and environment that all of these concordats and initiatives are meant to impact. So the K Concordat included is kind of, you can't escape the idea that it will have some effect on the broader research culture and environment. And in a nutshell, what the solution proposed was to move from this existing, what we call a Concordat-centric approach, where you have various initiatives, and all these initiatives require different people to deliver them. They operate on different timescales, they have different reporting requirements, and they also draw on different data and evidence and require inputs from different people in terms of their formation. And then for the ones that do have separate formal reporting, they have largely separate sort of formal accountability processes, recognising, although the great diversity of those 12 concordats, not all of them do. Around half a dozen have some kind of formal reporting requirement. And they're also then used for lots of different purposes. And one thing that became very apparent during this exercise was the importance of the ref in this, and the potential for misalignment with things like ref environment to drive unnecessary burden. So in a nutshell, what we proposed and then tested through that design-led approach, which Sarah described, was moving to from a Concordat-centric approach, where the Concordats are the thing and there's various inputs and various reporting requirements which aren't necessarily well aligned with each other, to what we called a more culture-centric approach. Starting with what does a good or what does a positive research cultural environment look like, and then how can the Concordats align as more kind of formative instruments and inputs to support that. So you're simultaneously both inviting the Concordat owners and various initiative owners to think, well, how do we actually support a positive research culture, and what does that mean for potential data duplication, overlaps, what does that mean for our separate reporting requirements? Can we streamline this into single reporting, and could we even just say, actually the instrument by which you report from all of this is the ref, for example. Absolutely central to this is having a shared understanding in the sector of what a positive research culture and environment looks like. And what we found actually is that there's a lot of work already going on in the sector around defining this. So here's an example from the University of Newcastle. There's another one on the screen from Science Europe. And they define these pillars around collaboration and collegiality, freedom to grow and explore, fairness, inclusion, openness and integrity. And what we're proposing is to build on that and to say, actually, what does that mean at the next level down? So fairness and inclusion, what are the indicators of that? How do you know you're being fair and inclusive? How do you know you have a fair and inclusive research culture? So our solution calls on initiative owners and the users themselves to create those shared principles, those shared pillars of what a good research culture looks like, to then define what that means in terms of indicators. This is not about metrics. The indicators may be qualitative or quantitative. They may express what a baseline looks like, and they may express what excellent looks like, and then use that for the Concordats to align behind as more formative things. So last slide, what does this mean for the KE Concordat? Well, the KE Concordat and its principles, if you actually look at those in isolation, and you didn't know this was called the KE Concordat, a lot of those are quite similar to what other Concordats are trying to achieve. So by adopting this shared understanding of positive research culture, what we'd invite you guys to do, as people interested in the KE Concordat, is think what already exists, what other data sources could you draw on to inform those type of things. And I guess the real sort of provocation we want to leave you on is my kind of sort of central point to this is the KE Concordat is inescapably tied into research culture and environment. It will have an impact on culture and environment, or organisational culture and environment, even more widely than that. So where do you see overlaps with other Concordats, and what does this mean for the KE Concordat in terms of those principles and in terms of potential alignment to a shared understanding of a positive research culture? So that's it, I think, and I'll hand back to Amanda.
Thank you very much, Hamish and Sarah. I think that's a really good introduction to what we're going to be discussing over the next kind of 40 minutes to an hour. Rather than answering this question now, I think what we'll do is kind of hear from Fariba from NCUB in terms of their findings from reviewing the KE Concordat submissions. But when we come to the table talk and further work from Greg, we need to hold that question in mind, because I think it's a really important question for us as institutions. And as we saw, 12 Concordats, all with elements of research culture in it. It's really important that we start to understand where the KE Concordat feeds into that, because I know it's changed our culture in our institution. I can see from nods around the table, I think it has had an impact on research culture. So I'm going to hand over to Fariba, who's going to give us an overview of the KE Concordat impact.
Great. Oh, do I need to? Okay, great. Are my slides up? I'll trust that someone's got that. Who's going to bring that up? Pardon? There we go. There we go. Thank you. Perfect. So my name's Fariba. I'm a policy lead for research and innovation at the National Centre for Universities and Business. I know a lot of you here, so it's great to see some familiar faces. And I know a lot of you who have been involved in the Concordat, either as evaluators, as participants, as kind of key contacts, and you know, just in various different ways. So it has impacted a lot of us, and it's great to kind of be here and be able to discuss the future of the Concordat, but also be engaging with yourselves to kind of help us figure out what that means. So my role at NCUB is policy lead for research and innovation, but I sit on the operational group for how kind of shaping what that looks like in terms of the last year's submission process and the 112 institutions that participated in the development year, and as we kind of look forward, what that looks like for the next iteration of the Knowledge Exchange Concordat. So over the last few days, we've been talking about knowledge exchange, rightly so, about kind of how it's evaluated, the funding that's attached to it, the political interest that's been garnered by it, and certainly I don't think that's going to change. I think political interest is probably going to increase over the next few years. And the Knowledge Exchange Concordat kind of sits amongst all of these kind of different initiatives, the Knowledge Exchange Framework being one, HIFE, REF narratives, all of these kind of different initiatives that are helping to drive forward knowledge exchange activity within institutions. But I think what I've also heard over the last few days is how for some, and for I think across the board actually, for some academics or certainly within institutions, it can remain a kind of nebulous concept. Certainly outside of HE, we know that the term knowledge exchange isn't kind of acknowledged. It can be seen even within institutions as burdensome, perhaps additional, or even worse, kind of unimportant compared to the more traditional aspects of universities, such as teaching and research. But I think that's why the Knowledge Exchange Concordat has been brought in as part of this kind of third pillar to help kind of help institutions to embed in knowledge exchange activity, so that it is seen as kind of not as an additional activity, but rather embedded throughout the institutional core activity. And it's really about impact. So telling the stories about how our teaching is making a difference, how our research has impact on our students, on our communities, and our teaching makes a difference on our students and how they go into the local communities or indeed international communities, and taking that knowledge exchange outside of just the university. How does that translate into the real world? And just to give, I just Googled knowledge exchange in UK universities as part of this, and these are the images that came up. And I think for me, it just told a story about, you know, what is knowledge exchange? These are, you know, from VR robotic labs to the cultural collaborations delivered as part of universities' civic mission to heritage sites being preserved by researchers. It's really about these impacts that universities are having on communities and on societal problems and challenges and also opportunities. And the knowledge exchange at Concordat was brought in to help us be more ambitious, to be bolder, to do more of this across our universities, highlighting and understanding, as Amanda said in her opening comments, about the value of KE and why it's important. So we get to the more kind of mundane aspects of this, but I thought it was important to kind of revisit what were the objectives of the Knowledge Exchange Concordat when it was set up. So specifically, it was set up to identify good practice, so developing a shared understanding of what good KE looks like. Improving practice, does what it says on the tin. Developing stronger and better partnerships with external partners, and adding that greater transparency to the process of self-review and evaluation. So this is to give funders and government broad confidence of the activity that is taking place. So last year we completed a development year where 112 institutions across the UK took part in the Knowledge Exchange Concordat kind of submission process. That was a a real success story, I think, for us, knowing that it was voluntary. And it's so many institutions across all sorts of different missions, sizes, various stages of their KE journey wanted to do this and were committed to improving better practice in their KE. So over the next 40 minutes, 30 minutes, we want to hear from you about how that went, and your views on how and why, or certainly why not, the Knowledge Exchange Concordat has kind of met its objectives, and kind of hearing from you so that we can then work together to help shape the future of the Knowledge Exchange Concordat. We had a great development year. What does the future of it look like? Were there aspects of it that weren't particularly valuable? Were there aspects that were, really had an impact on your institution? And certainly the people who took part in it are the people we want to hear from. So a few words just before. I'm just going to the next few slides are just going to go over some of the key findings that the NCB took from our review of the submissions, so at the 112 action plans, self-evaluations, and evaluator comments that came out of that first development year. They're not necessarily recommendations, but more a series of kind of observations as well as key findings from that. And this slide just gives you an idea of who took part across some of the KEF clusters as well. So the first finding was about different stages. So acknowledging that institutions, and rightly so, are at different stages in their knowledge exchange journey. So what does that mean? It means that there are institutions that have been doing this for almost since, well, if we take the broader definition of what knowledge exchange is, since their inception. But certainly as a recognized concept, I think the kind of inception of science parks and the early on kind of understanding of what knowledge exchange was more kind of embedded within that kind of STEM understanding. Whereas now we're seeing a much more kind of developed understanding of what knowledge exchange and broader definition of knowledge exchange. And I think that kind of came out in some of the observations around the action plans. So stage one being some HE providers were kind of developing, still at the stage of developing their knowledge exchange policies. And others were looking to review and align all their policies and processes to drive KE. And others kind of beyond that process, sort of looking to develop more formal policies around specific areas. So developing kind of improving their business gateways or their front door, as well as kind of standardizing their data collection. What we did observe throughout all of that was actually a real commitment from all HE providers, and this was so encouraging, that regardless of the kind of resource base, the HIFE allocation, all institutions were really committed to improving their practice, and that showed through the kind of level of actions that were submitted through it as well. Second finding was around evaluation, and in the previous session on skills, we sort of heard, and I think it's been resonating over the last couple of days as well in each of the sessions, around how evaluation continues to be a kind of challenge. And I think throughout all of the self-evaluations, there was kind of a lower self-evaluation score on how institutions regarded their kind of plans, their processes around evaluation. Embedding that at the kind of start of KE activity still remains a challenge. And I think that was important for us as policymakers to know, to be able to put the support mechanisms in place, but also for, in terms of the ability to tell the story, to gather evidence, to be, building in those feedback mechanisms from external partners is all really important. And I think that's also speaks to the kind of being able to be transparent and also, I suppose, justify some of the funding that's coming from government. That is going to increase. I think that pressure from government as we kind of go into a different kind of economic situation, that tightening of fiscal resources is going to continue. And so that eagle eye on what is the impact, how are we evaluating what we're doing, and how are we telling our stories is going to become increasingly important. This one is about capacity building, and it was just a recognition that across all institutions, the actions around capacity building and capability building were necessitated the involvement across, a variety of different departments, and getting kind of HR involved, as well as graduate careers and guidance, and all the different departments to work across kind of workforce planning, promotions, training and reward, and recognition programs required a kind of a big resource-intensive action plan. And so I think what we noticed is that those tended to be longer term. Institutional strategy. So unsurprisingly, this was a kind of finding that, and many institutions were working towards this, that knowledge exchange needs to be embedded at the very highest levels of institutional strategy. So not as a kind of individual, we've got a knowledge exchange strategy, and that sits amongst the kind of implementation plans. But how is that embedded at the very mission and core institutional level? And that then translates into being kind of reviewed regularly by senior leadership. It's owned by senior leadership. It's kind of embedded in the governance models, and there's KPIs attached to that. This one's about IP. Again, rightly so. I think an observation was that across the board, institutions are focused on developing, improving on, creating a better, kind of more awareness on IP policies and processes. And in light of the kind of, again, government interest, we've got the spin-out review this year. It remains a priority for institutions, and that was really encouraging to see that institutions are committed to improving their IP policies. And making sure that it's agile, so that what was developed 4 or 5 years ago is not necessarily remains kind of suitable for today. So remaining committed to reviewing those. SMEs, again, so the development year sort of took place throughout the pandemic, which was challenging for many, but also it really highlighted, and I think for us at NCUB, we were sort of monitoring and able to observe some of the really interesting and engaging ways that institutions were reaching out to their local SME communities, recognizing that they were many were in kind of dire straits throughout that lockdown period. But the engagements, institutions remain engaged and committed to working with SMEs and developing specific strategies. And I think, again, over the last couple of days, we've heard that institutions recognize that they can be resource intensive, so the need to kind of work with other institutions or other partners to develop specific strategies around SME engagement is an important priority for institutions. And I think what we also notice is that there are opportunities for us to kind of share good practice in this area to make it simpler and easier to engage. So that's something we are taking on board in our next steps. I think that's... Yep, this is the last one. So, and this one, the final one, is about longer-term approaches. And perhaps I'm sort of speaking to the choir here, but recognizing that KE needs to be kind of resourced at an institutional level. Relying on that kind of single-year funding stream isn't sustainable. We know that, but it then means that it's not embedded across the institution. It has other knock-on effects for how, for the ways in which academics might be able to kind of, and across kind of different staff pools, how they engage, whether they think it's kind of a one-year program and then we can forget about it. So an institution kind of taking that on and being able to resource that fully means that it becomes more embedded, and it's strengthened, I think, across the university. So this slide is just to also pull on from Universities UK. So you'll hear from Greg, also did an evaluation of the process around the Knowledge Exchange Concordat. And that was important through a survey, as well as various kind of workshops and so forth, to understand what has been the impact of the Knowledge Exchange Concordat on participants themselves, institutions. And these are just a couple of the key findings. So it's an overwhelmingly sort of positive response from participants that it has made a difference. 99% said they've made changes as a result of participating in the development year, and 100% participants expect that their priority actions will be implemented. And I think, again, Amanda referred to it in her opening comments, that it really has gained visibility. So knowledge exchange has, I think, participating in the knowledge exchange Concordat, ensuring that it's being signed off at the highest levels, ensuring that it's kind of being debated at the kind of executive levels means that it is being embedded. It's being sort of noticed. It's not attached to metrics or funding like the KEF is, but it's the ways in which you can achieve the kind of metrics that the KEF is looking at. So we're now at the point of kind of evaluating where we are and how we move forward with the KEC. You heard yesterday from Research England, who were talking about some of the key findings and recommendations from the KE review. We've heard from Oxentia about the kind of the review of knowledge of concordats as well, and all of those are really important for us to. Even if you're not based in England, Research England's KE review was really important to understand the kind of important indicators from government and for the sector about what are the priorities and where are the areas of interest. And I think I've mentioned it just minutes ago before, but I think demonstrating impact is not going to go away. In fact, I think with the kind of tightening of fiscal resources, universities' ability to tell their story and show their impact is going to become increasingly important as well. So the takeaways from the evaluation recommendations are reducing burden. Hamish and, sorry, I forgot your name, and your colleague, Sarah, you touched upon the kind of the broader priority for government around reducing burden on institutions. That came out really strongly in our evaluation as well in Universities UK. That this needs to align to other reporting requirements as much as possible, so the KEF narratives, HIFE reporting. Repeating it every 3 years, that felt like a kind of in-between where it wasn't too frequent, but it also means that there's an opportunity to refresh and think through some of the actions and priorities for each institution, and then evolving that to become more responsive to national priorities. This is kind of speaking to the fact that we are in a period where we've understood that knowledge exchange can play a key role, and certainly universities can play a key role in kind of solving societal challenges, and the ways that we do that, if we can strengthen those approaches and those activities, will be through things like the knowledge exchange Concordat. So, next steps. We at NCUB have been tasked with developing a repository of good practice, and that has been very exciting for us because I've been involved in a series of case study interviews, hearing from many of you in this room, to just understand what does good KE look like. And that came out really strongly, again, in our webinars about, wanting to know from others, from peers, from other KEF clusters, from other different, whether it's across different sizes and missions of institutions, what are others doing in this space? How can I learn from them? Is there a kind of a place that I can go? So setting up those networks, having this key case study repository will be, it's kind of the beginning of it. So we're going to be launching that in July. Encourage everyone to come along to that. It'll be an online event. But we'll be building on that so that we can feature and showcase what institutions are doing across those 8 different principles that Hamish put up on his slide. Whether it's kind of skills building, it's IP around IP policies and processes, or certainly the kind of institutional mission. What does that look like in other institutions, and how can I learn from them? And that will also include a series of resources as well. So across the board, there's all sorts of resources being offered. So how do we include that in the website? That will be available on the Knowledge Exchange Concordat website. Sorry, my voice is it's been a long 3 days. And then finally, so shaping the future of the Knowledge Exchange Concordat. Well, that's what we're doing here today. We want to hear from you. There'll be an opportunity for discussions at the tables after this. Greg's going to speak to this right afterwards. But we're really keen to understand what impact the Concordat has made on yourselves, at your institutions, at the highest levels as well as at the lowest levels. What could change? What wasn't so helpful? That's all part of this. So we are at the point of kind of being able to shape that next iteration. So please don't be afraid to give your views on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fariba. That was really helpful, and I feel very reassured that some of the things that we put in our action plans have obviously reflected in the general outcome. So we weren't an isolated institution going, oh, we're really bad at this and we need to improve this. Actually, it looks like there's a lot of commonality across the sector, which is great. So on to the future. And I will now hand over to Greg to talk about the future of the KE Concordat. And after that, or during this time, there will be the opportunity for us to do some feedback and, as Fariba said, to help shape the future of the KE Concordat. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Amanda. Good morning, colleagues. Greg Wade, Policy Manager at Universities UK and lead in the Knowledge Exchange Concordat. I must confess I had great fun doing all the Concordat webinars, which I hope some of you found useful and helpful, but it is truly great to see people face-to-face as well. It's a great experience. I must admit a little bit of disappointment walking up on the stage today, because I was half expecting the flashing lights and the music that we had last night at the dinner, but I'll struggle on regardless. And hopefully my presentation skills will have been improved as I went on a media training course yesterday, which was quite challenging, but also fascinating because the trainer had just left the ITV morning programme. So all I can say in the strictest confidence is what she told us, which is it's all true and there's more to come. So you heard it here first. Excellent. Right, I have got 2 slides because we do generally want to encourage conversation and get your feedback, and it is an opportunity for you. So my first slide is just saying, partly answering the question, why are we having this conversation? So we've had a lot of strategic level conversations driven partly by the fact that the UK has got a new chief executive, we've got a new director of policy, we've got a new director of communications, and we're developing a new strategy at the UK. So they are challenging and questioning everything we're doing, not just the Knowledge Exchange Concordat. Secondly, we have Research England funding up to March 2023, but there's never any guarantee of permanent Research England funding. But more importantly, we've had a series of year-long renewals of the contract, and we'd actually like to reflect on how we can establish the Knowledge Exchange Concordat going forward over a number of years and provide a better foundation for its future development. If any of you are members of the advisory group, I should say I apologise for us going quiet on that. That's been occupying our time, but we will be organising a meeting, the advisory group, very soon. So you'll hear from us shortly. So this is an opportunity for us to honestly pause, reconsider and reshape the Knowledge Exchange Concordat. And the view was, if we're going to do that, why don't we start now before we've asked you to do anything with the Concordat? And as people have said, we've had the development year. It's been successful, but it was a massive effort. We recognise that. There was a significant evaluation effort. So how can we learn from this and improve and hone the process? We've mentioned we've had the presentation on the review of the Concordats, and there is a question about identifying overlaps. And as you'll all be in institutions and contributing to all these Concordats, you'll have a greater handle on the reality of the overlaps than myself. The KE funding review in England, KEF and HIFE in England, and I've had feedback that some of the priority actions identified in the Knowledge Exchange Concordat are coming through in the KEF, so there's a relationship there to develop. And we know that the Concordat has been embedded in Wales, in the Research Wales Innovation Funding Strategies. We know that there's a lot of interest in Scotland and positive feedback from the review that they've had there, and both Northern Ireland universities are engaged. And needless to say, there's a wealth of experience in this room, which we're hoping to tap into. So that leads me to what we're going to do next. So we've bombarded you with a lot of information, but there is a simple question about what should the KEC be or do to be of most value to you reflecting on your experiences, reflecting on the processes, reflecting on the impact. And so just to provoke some thoughts, in no particular order, is it about profile raising within the institution? Is it about ensuring that you can be an evaluator again? So there's value from individual people, institutions experiencing and engaging with the Concordat. Is it important that there should be published evidence coming out of the Concordat? How much should we retain the level of self-evaluation? It was a significant effort. Should it be once only? Or should it be about updating it, or periodic, or voluntary? How important is the sharing of good practice to you, and could that be improved? Should it meet government needs? We asked you to reflect on your own strategic priorities. Should it be more targeted in terms of asking specific questions about IP and commercialisation? Should it be about enhancing impact? We've had feedback that it's enhanced K in institutions, so you'd automatically think it's enhanced impact, but we haven't really collected or published information on the detail of that. How important is peer review and getting feedback from colleagues? And how important was the ambitious identification of ambitious actions? So that's kind of a menu, and we're going to go into discussions on the tables at the moment. So it'd be really interesting to know, out of all you've heard today in your experience, what strikes a chord with you most? And if you were developing a recipe for the Concordat in its next stages, what would be on the menu? So just looking at time, shall we do 20 minutes of conversation?
Sounds good.
Okay. If you could identify a rapporteur, and after 20 minutes, we'll ask you to identify, your top 3 items to put on the menu, and then we'll take it from there. But also, I should say that this is about the future. If you have any suggestions about what we should do over the next year as well, and some of those are commitment conversations, I'm really interested in hearing those. And if any of you want to add to the comments from the feedback, please come direct to myself or Fariba or Tamsin or Amanda, because I think we'd really like to keep the conversation going. And I do assure you this is a genuine opportunity to influence the next stage of the Concordat at a very early stage. So thank you.